Welcome. My name is Fred Bowers, and I am the chair of the Belfast Climate Crisis Committee. In this video, I will explain the process of stormwater as it relates to precipitation, soils, runoff, and groundwater. The Belfast Climate Crisis Committee has been focusing on stormwater for over a year now. Big storm events occurred in many places around the world, and we recognized this, and we thought, can powerful storms impact us here in Belfast too? Well, yes, they can. Intense storms cause flooding and erosion, so they are significant factors in our lives. However, we also know that storms are becoming more intense due to climate change and the heating of the ocean. Stormwater is frequently in the news. The photograph on the left was published in many newspapers. It shows the flooding that occurred on Route 1 below the Waldo Avenue crossing. The cause was unknown at the time of the event, but it stopped traffic for a while until the water finally drained away. It turned out to be caused because the trash grate that goes into the storm sewer was clogged up and the water couldn't go under the highway to a small stream and into the bay. Instead, it went onto the highway. The storm that caused most of these events occurred during Halloween of 2021. Storms like this result in erosion of soil and gravel when stormwater runs off roads and driveways and then spills over the shoulders and sides of streets. This erosion sometimes undermines the paved areas and costs the money for the city and the public to repair and improve these problems. And now that we know the power of water, we must consider that Belfast is a hilly city, and water runs to the sea quickly in Belfast. The valley in the middle of the pink area is Little River. The big yellow arrow points to somewhere near Back Belmont Road. This is another view of topography from Route 1 to the bay, inside of the bypass. This land rose from the sea about 13,000 years ago. It popped up rather quickly almost in some cases. So there are ocean's bottom sediments and glacial till. These vestiges from the Ice Age glacial melting often impede drainage because they are compact and clay is found. The part of Belfast within the bypass was the last part that became land before the sea level stabilized at its present level. There are marshy areas, steep areas, and perfectly drained areas within the bypass, but all the water flows to the sea. Some of it flows to the most urbanized parts of Belfast. Stormwater runoff is sometimes tough to manage, but if you understand the soils and geology, a stormwater system can be made robust and can be protective and serve as a resource when water is stored. Development in Belfast requires a significant amount of urban engineering. There are streets, houses, cut and fill, and drainage networks. These are almost all in hilly land. The age of the infrastructure and increased population density have strained the water and stormwater and sewer systems in Belfast. So what can we do? We can all learn a little hydrology. It's always good. We can work with garden clubs and the Soil and Water Conservation District to improve our landscaping practices in ways that will improve storage and reduce runoff. We can talk to our officials and let them know how important this is. The water cycle is simple, but an important process to understand, and you've no doubt seen it before. Solar energy powers the process. Evaporation of the water creates clouds. Clouds result in precipitation. Precipitation falls onto the ground. Some water seeps back into the rivers and the sea by base flow. Gravity moves water down into the soil, but the soil cannot handle it all, and this causes runoff. More intense storms that we expect in the future will cause more runoff. This diagram illustrates the hydrological model of the way water moves over and through the land. Precipitation falls onto the ground. If the rate of precipitation exceeds the ability of the soil to absorb the water, it follows the topmost lines and sometimes results in runoff quickly. Geomorphologists use this model to calculate runoff. But notice at the base of this topographic section, overland flow combines with base flow and direct precipitation onto saturated ground. This is where the maximum amount of runoff usually comes from. This process takes time because there is a lag between the time the rain falls and the time it takes to create runoff. They call that time of concentration. The major volume of runoff water occurs where the yellow oval appears on the slide. This diagram is a flood hydrograph. We see that the red bars represent precipitation on day 1. The blue segment illustrates the runoff volume at different times. There is a lag between when the rain falls and the topographic low point begins to flood. There is always some base flow, and that is why a stream does not dry up for a while if it does not rain. In urban areas where impervious pavement covers the land, the flood hydrograph responds more quickly and it reaches a peak flow sooner. So that's when the rivers are flowing and the streams. But if you can send it toward the left, it becomes even faster. And that's what happens when you become urbanized. Forested areas are able to absorb water and they buffer the flow, so there's typically more recharge and a slower time to reach high peak discharge on forest land. This model is used by civil engineers to calculate the necessary size of culverts and drains. Here we see a photograph of the soil profile on Bayview Street in Belfast. It is somewhat shallow to bedrock or other restrictive layer. This restrictive layer often presents seepages and springs. Note the seepage at the base of the ground beneath the driveway that's with a blue arrow. This soil profile was exposed when I improved my driveway and I put in drainage there where the blue is toward the yellow. This photograph is my neighborhood. It has a similar landform as that diagram I showed you back before of a hill slope. Well, runoff water from the street above combines with direct precipitation, roof runoff, seepage from the ground, and it produces saturated flow that you see at that top arrow pointing downhill. The blue lines show the flow of water from surface and groundwater. The arrow on the bottom is from the groundwater seepage that's coming out of the area that's been cut by the top fence post. This event was on December of 2019. The precipitation event that day was not excessive, but it rained heavily for a week before, and the ground was saturated, and then it rained 1.5 inches that day. This photograph shows that when enough water accumulates, channel and sheet flow can begin to occur. These temporary streams, referred to as ephemeral streams, begin to carve out channels and cause erosion. This is the erosional process as described by geologists. These little streams must go somewhere. Sometimes they go toward the neighbor's property. A good neighbor approach is achieved when you do your best to keep the water on your property. Make sure it goes to the street ditch. I try to do that. Once the water reaches the ditch, the stormwater becomes a portion of the stormwater that must be managed by the city. The city maintains these ditches, culverts, drains, and does a good job, even though there is a need to map these features to be able to prepare for future storm events. The video you now see on the right side of the screen demonstrates visually that there is power when water moves, and the flow is strong at the bay where the stormwater system ends. This is the Allen Street Rangeway culvert, and the water comes out sometimes as turbulent flow. Turbulent flow is capable of causing erosion and other damage. We can see the beach erosion and scouring that occur. Beach erosion and soil erosion are clear indicators that the land is eroding into the sea. These erosional processes will become more intense as climate change produces more intense storms. This photograph shows a more subtle form of seepage that causes damage to paved areas. In this situation, we see that water is flowing between layers of pavement, and then it emerges through cracks in the pavement and flows over the top layer. When this happens in winter, it often causes icy patches that are dangerous for pedestrians, bicycles, and automobiles. The picture was taken at the base of Condon Street, and one can clearly see the green structure that is a component of the combined sewer overflow number 2. The city has plans to improve this. The hydrologic cycle is not completely understood unless we consider groundwater. This slide depicts how water tables and aquifers can impact people who have wells, wet basements, and springs. Groundwater can have impacts far away from the recharge source because some aquifers are capable of causing artesian conditions. What is Belfast doing to address stormwater? On September 2022, Belfast City Council approved Ulver Associates to implement a stormwater drainage system review scope of work project to study each and every drain and pipe and culvert throughout the whole city. And they're starting with the phase 1 is inside of the bypass that will cost $70,000, a total cost of $170,000 in order to complete the entire city. Belfast is a water world. There are streams, rivers, and the sea. There's much beauty in a water world, but there is also some danger. The City Council and the Climate Crisis Committee are working toward efforts that will protect our city and make it sustainable. Thank you. That's the end.